Have you ever?
Kingdom greetings and God's riches blessings be multiplied to you and yours, beloved family. You are tuned into another segment of Healing Our Land's live interactive broadcast. I'm your host, Pastor Hobbs, live here in the studio. Yes, live here in the studio on tonight with my brother and friend and comrade in the person of Truth. I love that name, and I'm gonna at one point I'm gonna ask you about that because, but this brother, many of you have heard me advertising the event coming up, and he's going to talk about that on May the 28th. But unclean and is urban trauma the new leprosy? I'm going to be there. I'm encouraging everybody who can. Let's pack the house at the State House, the Hall of Flags, 12:30 to 3:30. Then it's free to the public, and you don't want to miss it. But we have the founder of the organization Explanations from Exile that's presenting this unclean is urban trauma the new leprosy. But we're gonna get right into the conversation. I'm so humbled that he would take time to be able to come here on a Sunday evening to engage our listening and viewing audience. But we want to have a live conversation, real time. You know how we do it here on Boston Praise. It's real conversation. It's real relationship. And so we want you to call in live on the air, 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685 with your questions, your comments, your concerns. Certainly, our main webpage is www.bostonpraiseradio.tv. There you can see us, you can hear us, and engage in the international instant chat. We're also on Pastor Bruce Wall's Facebook page, our founder and CEO and senior pastor, the visionary of this platform. That Healing Our Land's broadcast is Tuesday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. and Sunday evening, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And so many broadcasts, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. You can tune into www.bostonpraiseradio.tv. You know, we have an FM platform that's WBPG-LP are the call letters, and you can find that on your local dial, 102.9 FM, 102.9 FM from the hours of Monday through Saturday, 2 in the morning till 9 in the morning, and Sunday 2 in the morning till 6 p.m. Boston's only FCC licensed multimedia platform where our brothers and sisters are tuning in from the Nashua County Jail, the Suffolk County House of Correction. And if you are actually in those settings and you want to engage in this dialogue, you too can by simply writing us at 670 Washington Street, Dorchester, Mass. 02124. But without further ado, welcome, my brother. How are you?
Peace, my brother. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. We're so excited, man. I'm actually going to I'm gonna shift a little bit, and what I'm gonna do is actually, while I make some adjustments here, I'm gonna ask you just to introduce yourself to our listening and viewing audience. I'm gonna put the camera on you, and you'll have the mic. And I also want you to also tell people about the event. So I don't know if you want to start with that, and then a little bit about just who you are, and I'll be back to join you in just a moment.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you mentioned, the Unclean event at the State House on the 28th. We're holding it at the State House. So the theme is Unclean is Urban Trauma, the New Leprosy. And what we're doing with this event is a grant that we received from the Mass Humanities and the Mass Cultural Council for an oral history event, right? So this is the second part of the series, and we're exploring the historical connections or historical references to leprosy, right? So we know leprosy, Middle Ages, skin affliction. We didn't really have the medical or scientific advancements that would have allowed society to engage in the way they do now. Leprosy is now known as Hansen's disease, right? It's nowhere near as deadly as it was thought to be back in those times. And the skin affliction and the assumption that if you contracted this disease, that it was due to some moral shortcoming or sin in your own life, right? So this was like something you brought on yourself. So society was justified in their in what they deem to be appropriate to put you in either a leprosarium or a leper colony, which are essentially prisons, right, where you would languish until you died or you were disfigured or whatever. But that was on you as far as they were concerned, right? So you fast forward to now, contemporary times, and we think about like violence. A lot of the advocacy that I do is around violence, specifically urban violence, right? And we think about the astronomical rates of mental health conditions that are highly concentrated in Black and brown communities, the astronomical rates of violence and incarceration in these communities, right? So the preferred method of dealing with these issues is incarceration, right? And we think about mass incarceration, and 2/3 of the state prison populace comprised of violent infractions, right? So just an acknowledgement that we cannot end mass incarceration without addressing the ways in which we deal with violence and violent infractions, right? So with this project, we're highlighting the fact that urban trauma, like I said, with the high concentrations of urban trauma and violence in these spaces, incarceration is still the preferred method of interruption and treatment in these spaces. And skin presentation determines whether you're going to get treatment or punishment, right? So it begs the question, right? Like, is urban trauma the new leprosy? So that's what we'll be exploring in this event. We have formerly incarcerated individuals who will be providing their narratives, currently incarcerated individuals who will be providing their narratives of survival, the hundreds of crimes that were committed against them before they committed their first, and the accountability that they take for the violent infractions that they committed prior to their incarceration. So we'll hear from them. We'll also open it up for a public discussion. Obviously, we're in the State House, so we'll be engaging legislators and community stakeholders. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see you there. This is an opportunity, like I said, to hear from individuals who are the largest contributors to mass incarceration. And we have an opportunity to hold systems of accountability accountable in the State House. So we'd love to see you there. We're looking forward to this event. There's been a lot that went into it, a lot of commitment, and a lot of just like heavy stories and a lot of healing that individuals have had to undergo before they could even tell these stories, right? And accountability that individuals have to accept before they can even tell these stories. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about like what's behind a lot of the violence and mass incarceration that we're seeing today. But yeah, that's like a very maybe not so brief overview of the event.
Man, thank you, brother. I love it. I mean, I was so pleased to be able to learn about this particular event and understand. I love the parallel of leprosy, right? As a person who who has been brought up and raised in church.
Sure.
Secondly, so I've heard that story from a child. Leprosy. In fact, my father, God rest his soul, has been, transitioned a little over a year ago. And so a lot of the things that he said, even more now, just resonate, but, and I appreciate those stories, but he would talk about the leper colonies that they were, in fact, the religious leaders, whom, and again, Jesus, and, whom he ministered, he healed the lepers, right? And so again, it's powerful, the parallel, and quite candidly, those who know my ministry, Being Healing Our Land, was birthed out of a response to the issue of HIV and AIDS, which was an epidemic at a time that disproportionately impacted Black and brown and poor people that would be also akin to something that might be leprosy, because quite candidly, in the early stages, they were demonized, they were fearful of people who had HIV, and so and blamed. Like, this is something you did. So this is your punishment. So we just leave you to die alone by yourself.
Right.
And so the parallels are, and the trauma, we're dealing with trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. Never mind, if you go back to the fact that this country was built by our ancestors, and the trauma of being taken from the land, and the transatlantic slave trade. That was, just horrific. And we were born in trauma as African Americans, disconnected from our roots, and then relegated to second class citizens. Literally, the Constitution said at one point that black people were 3/5 human.
Indeed.
You know what I'm saying? So this is the founding fathers of this country who, again, so the parallels of that leprosy is real, of trauma, on top of trauma, and now you react out of that trauma, and then you're further traumatized in carceral settings that really are just, it's perpetual punishment. The notion of correction really happens. I would say it's the exception rather than the rule. So I'm curious, that's a good segue for us to go into your story. Like, okay, so what was your journey? What was your experience, the trauma that you experienced? What led you, just your story that you're comfortable sharing in terms that led you to this work and facilitated, what was your process of addressing that trauma, particularly while you were incarcerated, when those resources aren't really largely there in place, and you come out with all this?
Yeah. Nah, it's a great question. So, as was stated, right? My name is Truth. I go by the name of Truth. I was incarcerated for 16 years. I've been home for about 20 months now. I was incarcerated for a homicide. I'm out on parole now. And I can't tell my story of incarceration. I can't tell my story of survival and enactment of violence. I can't tell any of that without highlighting like a history of trauma, right? Primarily like racial trauma, right? And this is a term that I never even heard the term racial trauma until I was incarcerated. I was already incarcerated for a decade before I was introduced to the whole concept and science behind racial trauma, right? So I'm reacting to some ever-present elements that I don't even know are present, right? I'm reacting to like social, emotional kind of like circumstances that I'm navigating that, like I said, I can't identify, much less recover from.
Sure.
Right? Without the assistance of community,
yes,
without the assistance of systems that have been set in place and that are largely responsible for my well-being, right? So I didn't have that assistance, right? So I'm first generation Jamaican American. My parents came to Boston in the late 60s, which, as we know, right, like a particular, I don't know if there's ever been a good time for black people in Boston, but it was a particularly rough time for black people, right? Yes. So, like I said, they come here from another country, and they've never been raised in this space, right? They're just trying to adapt and assimilate quickly, right? And what they experienced here was the way my father kind of outlined it, was like the racism was like one thing, but what they didn't anticipate was the treatment that they received from black Americans.
Okay.
Right? So my father talked about, being robbed and have his car broken into, people breaking into his apartment, and he's like, I didn't anticipate any of that. Right? So they left Boston and they went to New Hampshire. And that's where they had me. right? They had my brother first. My brother was born in Boston. They had me in New Hampshire. And yeah, so my father, he was a photographer and an art teacher and all that, so he wanted to start a business, a photography business, and he worked on that. And my mother and my brother moved to Maryland for a time. He stayed in New Hampshire, worked on that, and he was able to, land some large, long-term contracts that really changed like our financial situation almost overnight, right? So he moved us back, family reunited in a small town in New Hampshire, and we were maybe the second black family to integrate that space, that all-white space, right? So that came with a lot of course, we met a lot of racism, right? Sure. And just in general, just like a lot of racial trauma. But like I said, none of us knew what that was, right? I realized at an early age, like, we're not welcome here, right? And I was confused at, like, why my parents would want to have us in a space where we clearly weren't welcome, right? I was also confused at the fact that, like, I came to realize later that they weren't experiencing what I was experiencing, right? We were all exposed to the same trauma, but we were all experiencing it differently, right? My parents have never been the only black anything anywhere, right? Came from Jamaica, they came to Boston. So it was like, this is their first time really being like the only, they've never had to grow up. They've never grown up American. They've never grown up around, like I said, in an all white space, right? So to give them a little bit of grace, like, I understand, like, they just weren't equipped, right? To help us, myself and my brother, navigate that space, right? But at the time, I didn't understand, right? So, that caused like a rupture in the family dynamic. Because like I said, none of us are understanding the ways in which we're being impacted by this racism, right? So I get sent out of that space. They send me to New Jersey, to boarding school, because I'm just getting into a lot of stuff out there, right? So they send me away. And I'm back and forth between New Jersey and New York on my mother's side of the family in the Bronx. And I'm exposed to a different way of living, right? I'm exposed to a different type of trauma in that space, right? Like a very like omnipresent hyper exposure to like violence and criminality and what have you, right? So the images of black masculinity that I saw there were highly influenced by street culture, gang culture, drug culture, right? So and I was very susceptible to a lot, right? Because by that point I had lost a lot of respect for my primary male figures, right? Like my brother and my father, because like I said, they weren't equipped to help me navigate that space. I don't think they were equipped to even like help protect me physically or emotionally in that space, right? So there was a pretty significant disconnect there. So I leave New Jersey and I get sent to live with my grandmother in Boston, and like I said, I'm navigating many of the same types of elements that I left in the Bronx, and I'm not really, like I said, I'm not equipped to navigate this space, but I have to adapt very quickly to what it feels like to be, to not feel safe, right? And I can't really, when I look, like, I can't point to a time where I actually felt safe, right? Like, even prior to that, right? The physical kind of hazards were amplified and ever more present in Boston, but even in New, like I said, being in an all-white space, like I said, where there were physical and emotional threats, right, on a daily basis. It was like, I don't know, I had no reference to what it was to feel safe. So I was able to adapt very quickly, right? And yeah, at that time it was like a night out with friends. Like, you could anticipate somebody might die, right? Like a party, right, on the weekend. Like, somebody might not make it out of that. Somebody might not make it home that night, right? So I had to adapt to that very quickly. And I started replicating a lot of the violence that I was seeing around me, a lot of the violence that I had experienced and been victimized by, right? I felt like I had to replicate, I had to become the very thing that I was striving to survive, right? So, and this is without much assistance, right? So ultimately, that ended in an incident where I took someone else's life, right? I ended someone else's life who looked like me, who later I realized was more like me than he was different, right? So I had to kind of like, I had to process that and reconcile the fact that, yeah, like, there was a point where I didn't even anticipate, I know I'm going to either die or go to prison just because of the things that I was involved in. And to just think about the fact that that was like an acceptable consequence to me, right? I put a cap on my life. Like, I didn't think I would live beyond 23, right? So I got arrested a month before my 21st birthday. So now when I look back, I'm like, yo, I really didn't even anticipate. I anticipate I'd be dead within the next 24 months, right?
Wow.
So, but instead, I ended up taking somebody else's life, right? And I got a life sentence. And I exceeded the cap that I put on my own life. So now I'm 23 in prison with a life sentence. So now there's a lot for me to consider because I didn't even plan on being around this long.
Sure.
Right? Now I got to navigate this life. So I'm fighting for my life now. So, that was a journey, right? And very early on, I realized, like, okay, so I'm sentenced. I'm in the maximum security prison. I'm in Sousa, and I'm reading a lot. So let me bring you back. I'm sorry.
You good, bro.
So I'm in the county, and in Nashua Street, pre-trial. I get into a fight. I go to the hole. And my mother, I grew up in the church as well, right? My family's Seventh-day Adventist. So she sent me a Bible and a dictionary, right? So I'm sitting in the hole with this Bible and this dictionary. And I grew up in church, but I wasn't really engaged, right? So aside from, the Psalms and certain different Bible verses that my grandmother like forced us to memorize, right? When we spent the summers at our home, I can't think of a time when I ever really like opened the Bible and read the Bible, right? So, but this is something familiar to me. My life, as I know it, has like it's over, right? The bottom has just dropped out. They tell me, look, we're holding you without bail. The money that I paid to my lawyer. Like, I can recognize, I can see that, like, yo, I'm not sure this dude even like respects me, right? I feel like he's just looking at me like just some regular street dude, and the couple little dollars that I gave him didn't qualify me in his eyes, right? And so I was troubled by that. I was very confused by that, and so out of desperation, started reading the Bible. I'm trying to negotiate with God, right? Like, you gotta get me out of here, right? And if you get me out of here, there's some things that I'll change and all that. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that was that part of the journey. And so yeah, I'm reading a lot and I'm assessing a lot, and I'm reading the Gospels. And I would say at that time, the Bible really helped me to reassess like my moral compass and what was driving a lot of my behavior. It made me a lot more curious about like I said, like what was driving me, right? Which I really didn't, it wasn't practical to question any of these things prior, because I was in survival mode, right? There's no like room to stop and question. There's no room for empathy when you're struggling for your life, right? So at this time, I'm kind of like, I'm in a space where I can assess these things. So fast forward, I get sentenced, and I'm in, like I said, I'm in Sousa. And this was a pretty pivotal point for me, what I'm about to describe to you. I'm watching a PBS special, right? It was a debate forum, philosophy class. And it was a professor, Harvard professor, and he addressed the class at the end of the debate, which was a pretty hot topic at the time, especially like for people of faith, right? So they were debating, this is 2009, right? So they're debating whether the state should be able to legislate, like whether it's people gay marriage, right? They were debating abortion and whether the state should be able to legislate gay marriage. So it was an interesting, very charged debate, and but at the end, the professor addressed the class, and he told them, he's like, look, like, I hope if you've learned nothing else in this course, that at the very least, I hope you've learned to question everything, right? And anything that you question, if you're like vigorous and you're serious about it, you will not be able to see that thing the same way again. You won't be able to see it the same again. So I'm like, okay. That was big for me, because I'm like, yo, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of commitments that I've made, a lot of world views that I've adopted, views of myself that I've adopted that I haven't questioned, right? Decisions that I've made that I'm willing to live and die by that I haven't questioned, right? So that day I was really just like, yo, nothing's off limits. You can't afford to leave anything off limits, right? Your life as you know it is over. You just took somebody else's life. You're dragging people that you love through this experience with you. You owe it to everybody, and primarily to yourself, to embark on this journey of like I said, questioning everything. So that was like really the my compass for the rest of my incarceration, right? So I enrolled in school. I had to teach myself law, like I'm reading everything, and I got introduced. I'm involved in like every program in the institution, right? But in 2013, that's when I got introduced to restorative justice practices, right? And by that point, like, I had accepted responsibility for what I had done, just as a matter of fact, right? Like, yeah, I'm guilty, right? Obviously, I've been convicted. I was able to accept that, right? But accountability was like, that was another tier, another level that I had yet to kind of like explore.
Sure.
Right? So when I got introduced to restorative justice, so I'm in MCI Norfolk, it's like 2013. So they had annual retreats there, right? Where they have a weekend and you'd have 300 prisoners in the auditorium, breakout circles, judges, prosecutors, survivors, of violence, mothers, loved ones, they would all be in that space, right? And we'd learn about restorative principles, and there would be like real-time engagement, right? Accountability will be taken. We'd have discussions around that, and they were just like really healing spaces, right? So at the time I'm 20, maybe 28, 29, and they have a breakout circle, a 30 and under breakout circle. Everybody in the circle is 30 years old or younger. So going to the circle, and it's probably 25 of us, 25 prison residents, predominantly men of color, right? Like I said, everybody's under 30. Almost everyone in the room is serving a life sentence, right?
Wow.
For a loss of life. And we're also joined, like I said, by prosecutors, judges, mothers in the room whose loved ones had died violently, right? And the invitation was to speak to, first, these folks led with accountability, right? Prosecutors, the judges, they led with accountability. They said, look, we acknowledge that we have played a role in contributing to the systems of oppression, structural racism. We acknowledge that, right? And we want to take accountability for that.
Wow, the institution.
Well, not the prison,
Okay,
but the agents of the criminal legal system, right? So they took accountability for that. So criminal legal system and Department of Corrections, separate entities, but of course they cooperate,
Sure,
right? So
sure.
when I say criminal legal system, I'm talking like prosecutorial, everything that comes before prison, right? So that was like, no one in the room had anticipated that. No one in the room was used to hearing that, right? And they followed up with an invitation. They said, look, we want to understand what happened to you that caused you to contribute to the violent cultures in your community, right? That's what we want to know. We're not here to talk about guilt, innocence. You've already been convicted. We want to know what brought you to that place. So like I said, there's 25 individuals in the room. Many of these stories were hard to listen to. You have judges and prosecutors tearing up listening to these stories, right? And they acknowledge, like, listen, we haven't been trained, we haven't been educated, we have not been conditioned to consider any of the things that we just heard, right? One prosecutor even said, he's like, look, I have gauged my success in my career based off how much of your life I could take from you, right? So the accountability, that part was real, right? The healing component was real. I've been in prison almost a decade by that point. I'm almost 30 years old, and this was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt like a valued member of my community, right? In prison, serving a life sentence.
Wow.
My first experience, right? So that changed a lot for me, right? Like I said, it was very healing, very humanizing, very validating. And because that was also the first time anyone had ever asked me what happened to me, right? So I was very defensive up until that point when it came to talking about what I had done, right? Because no one ever asked me what happened to me. No one ever asked me, well, why did you even have the gun? No one ever asked me, well, why didn't you, like, you didn't call police? Why? Right?
Yeah.
I could have told you the umpteen crimes of violence that I'd seen and survived. I could tell you about the times I've been beat up by police, hospitalized, right? Nobody asked me any of that, right? So no one was looking for context.
Yes, sir.
Not an excuse,
No.
but an explanation as to, like, yo, why?
Yeah.
Why did you feel like you had to break the law to secure your safety as a young, vulnerable member of our community? right?
Yeah.
So once they asked, I'm like, oh, that was the most disarming thing they could have said to me,
Sure.
right? So it's like, okay, you want to lead with accountability. I feel I'm obliged to do the same,
Wow.
right? So, like I said, that changed a lot. And after engaging in those circles for several years after that, right? I couldn't help but notice that these conversations and these engagements weren't translating to policy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the restorative component was there, but the justice component was lacking as far as I could see, right? So, but I saw the ways that, these stories were changing hearts and minds and humanizing and really building community, right? In this back room in this prison. And I felt the need to provide access to society, right? Give them access to what was happening in this back room,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's when I endeavored to start the Explanations from Exile project, which was basically a writing project where individuals incarcerated for violent infractions would tell their stories. What happened to you pre-carceral?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to you that led you to commit the violent act that you committed, right? So that was I kind of underestimated like everything that entailed, right? Asking individuals to, like I said, talk about their experiences that have been normalized,
Mm-hmm.
right? These normalized exposures to violence and the ways in which individuals have been conditioned to minimize their own victimization,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm in the yard with individuals working out, pull-up bar, dip bar, shirts off, and you could see everything that individuals have survived.
Mm-hmm.
You see bodies riddled with bullet wounds and stab wounds, and these individuals I've been around, I've lived with for a long time, been in programming with, so many of them I know their stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask a brother like, yo brother, I know you're a survivor of gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
You've been shot a few times.
Mm-hmm.
How did that impact you? A lot of brothers tell me like, yo man, like it wasn't like traumatic. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I got shot, like brother get shot every day.
Mm-hmm.
I got shot twice. If you want to talk about like real trauma, you might want to talk to that brother. He been shot like 10 times.
Wow.
So like I said, the minimization
Yeah.
of our own trauma,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes.
So when we talk, let's talk statistics now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So statistically,
Mm-hmm.
almost half of inner city youth demonstrate symptoms of PTSD.
Mm.
Almost half, right? And that's just youth, right? Then we think about communities of color. I'm not making these numbers up.
Sure.
Statistically,
Mm-hmm.
black and brown communities have shown to possess symptoms of PTSD at the same rate as combat veterans,
Mm.
right? Due to this high concentration of violence and incarceration and all that. Then, statistically, black and brown communities are underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed with mental health conditions,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the recovery from these conditions, right, that are not engaged, that are not diagnosed, right? What's the probability that individuals are going to recover from that, right? So, like I said, 2/3 of the state prison populace is incarcerated for violence, right? So my challenge is to individuals who are talking about justice reform
Mm-hmm.
and decarceration.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not talking about violence,
Mm-hmm.
I'm questioning like how serious you are about decarceration and justice reform, right? Because the vast majority, the number one contributor to mass incarceration is violence,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's been legislation which has taken some of that into account with emerging adults and juvenile offenders, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or responsible parties who happen to be juveniles, right? But even that has, like, the definition of juvenile is changing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, as we speak,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if the predominant question is how old were you when you pulled the trigger,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the end of the discussion, we're missing a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the youthful trauma, the 50% of inner city youth
Yes.
who demonstrate symptoms, the youthful trauma that carries over, the likelihood that that will carry over into an adult infraction if they are not diagnosed and not evaluated, right? The likelihood that they will age out of the youthful offender demographic to commit an adult infraction, and we don't question what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now we run the risk of overcharging and over sentencing
Yep.
disproportionately black and brown individuals who have been charged and convicted with violent infractions. So I endeavored to kind of like examine that. So I was fortunate to be able to get my degree while I was incarcerated. So I took a few courses on ethnographies and statistics and data collection and all that. So I applied that to what I was doing with Explanation from Exile. So we surveyed 250 individuals in the institution.
Wow.
Right? Individuals who had lived or spent a significant amount of time in urban communities and who were incarcerated for a violent infraction. So let me just pull up some of what we uncovered with that, just to give you an idea of kind of like. All right, so participants in this study, right, reported particularly high rates of trauma exposure, right, pre-carceral. 98% witnessed violent crime in their community. 78% witnessed homicide in their community. 84% had been threatened or directly victimized by violence in their community. 98% had close friends or family who had been victimized by community violence. 91% witnessed police brutality in their community. 73% had been victims of police brutality themselves. Right? As it pertains to mental health engagement, only 16% reported receiving mental health evaluations prior to their arrest. 18% were evaluated after their arrest. Right? So the evidence here suggests two things. There's a strong likelihood that much of the violence that occurs in communities of color is trauma induced, right? And B, despite the greater likelihood for mitigating mental health conditions amongst defendants of color, this demographic faces a decreased likelihood of receiving mental health examinations when accused of violent crime, thus an increased likelihood of being overcharged and over-sentenced. Right? So I don't have my doctorate. I'm not an institution, right? So we frame this as a preliminary study, right? And since I got home, we were able to establish a partnership with the Racism-Based Violence and Injury Prevention Lab at Boston College to do a follow-up study to what we did here. Great. So just striving to, like I said, hold systems of accountability accountable and let them know that we know that they know, right? These aren't truth statistics, right? These are state-funded research projects that have produced this data, right? I did the research, I found these things, but I'm wondering why aren't people who are in the need to know position either not knowing or not aware of this information, or just not acknowledging it when someone like me comes into the courtroom, right? And policy in this instance would not require the state to reinvent the wheel, right? Like we already have veterans courts, right? Where they take into account, yeah, you might have been in combat, and we want to ensure that we take all that into account to ensure that we treat you justly when you come through our system.
Sure.
Right? But if I come from a community where, like I said, mental health conditions at the same rate as combat veterans, that's not enough. Right? So like I said, really just endeavoring the whole system, not excuse anyone
Sure.
for the harms that they've enacted, right? But to hold the system accountability, for telling we got to tell the whole truth.
Yes.
Right? And hold them accountable for facilitating some healing, not just for the defendant, but for the impacted parties, right? I talk about, I'm a restorative justice practitioner, right? So I use restorative language, right? I try not to say offender or victim, right? We say responsible party or impacted party, right? But when we're dealing with the inner city dynamic, there's an overlap there, right? It's not like a situation in Wellesley where an act of violence is committed, and the first thing we hear is that doesn't happen here, right? Something goes down in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, like what I saw in the restorative justice circles that I saw in prison was, there's a likelihood for a mother or anyone, a survivor, to have one in the grave and one in the cage, right? So there's a different level or different opportunity for empathy in that space, right? Not to say that they're not suffering, right, when they're exposed to these types of traumas, but there's like I said, it's just a different level of engagement. What we see now is a criminal legal system that is not inclined to facilitate healing. Rather, it's a system that exploits the pain, right, of both sides for conviction, right? Contributing to systems of oppression and structural racism that are generating generational wealth.
Yes, sir.
Right? So in my advocacy work, it's really just giving, like I said, providing access to these stories, providing access to the healing that's required, the healing opportunities for healing, right, that come out of these stories, right? Because the first thing you hear when someone survives or is exposed to the manner of violence that we're talking about, the first thing they want to know is why. Why did this happen? Right? Person whose life I took, their family never got to ask me why. I'm breaking the law if I'm in contact with the victims or the survivors of the harm that I caused. It's against the law. Right? So if I want to facilitate a healing process with these, I can't even reach out to them. I was going back to prison. Right? Wow. So now 15 years later, I get convicted 15 years later. In order for me to get out of prison, I got to have a parole hearing, right? Where now these family members have to relive what they've been striving to recover from for the past 15 years, 16 years. Right? And still don't get to have a conversation with me. Right? The healing and accountability that I've undergone and took and taken over all those years, they don't know what's going on.
Sure.
Right? So, like I said, the level of empathy that I was able to kind of access, where it's like, man, when I see that brother, I see myself. They don't know that. And the only time they get to hear is when I'm like I said, at this parole hearing, begging, groveling for my life, right? So there's gonna be a level of suspicion and bitterness, and all, which is warranted, right? Because the system that we're moving through has made for that, right? So one thing I'm advocating for with the policy we're advocating for is pretrial restorative practices, right? The opportunity for pretrial restorative practices between responsible parties and impacted parties.
I love it.
Right? Because the process I underwent isn't inevitable. Right? Like the healing and account, that's not inevitable. So the system is not facilitating that. It doesn't even require it, and then if anything, it undermines that process, right? So if we can get that at the front end, then that could inform, along with mental health engagements, right? Then that informs prosecution, it informs indictment, and it ensures that individual accountability is had and justice is served, right? But I've said a lot, like,
nah, man.
That's in a nutshell, like a lot of the work that I'm doing. So I'm a spoken word artist, like I said, like, so a lot of the work that I do outside of like legislative advocacy is just like trauma informed and healing informed art, right? This is a talent that I discovered and nurtured while I was inside. So I'm just using the art to elevate this very tough discussion, right? And it's a discussion that society's been given license to ignore, right? But yeah, I just want to use my mouthpiece and whatever platform that I'm able to develop to elevate that discussion. So,
wow, thank you, Truth. This is it's profound. I'm just taking this all in, and it's powerful. It's powerful. We actually have about 4 minutes before we have to pause to go to our station ID. But again, those who are tuned in, I know folks have questions. I know you've got comments, and we want you to engage in this conversation. Again, you can call us live at 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685 to speak to my guest directly and or myself. You can also communicate via Pastor Bruce Wall's Facebook page, as well as you can write us at 670 Washington Street, Dorchester, Mass. 02124. With the 3 minutes that we have before we go to our station ID and pause, and we will resume on the other side of the top of the hour for part two. Our brother's been so gracious to afford 2 hours of his time, as we've got a lot more to talk about. But with the 3 minutes remaining before we go to our station ID, I want you to again talk about the event that you have coming up on the 28th.
Yes, so the State House on the 28th. We'll be in the State House from 1 to 3 o'clock, exploring the lived experience of individuals who have been incarcerated for violent infractions. Some of these individuals are currently incarcerated, others are formerly incarcerated, and we'll be exploring the topic of unclean and the question of whether urban trauma is the new leprosy. And following this presentation, we'll be facilitating a public discussion wherein individuals, community stakeholders, legislators in the building, anyone in attendance will have the opportunity to contribute to the conversation and explore moving forward what justice and what resolutions to these issues could look like. So looking forward to having you there. Tickets are free. You can register at Eventbrite. I don't know if, Pastor, you'll be able to put the QR code on the page.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can also, if you go to my Instagram page, which is Explanations from Exile Instagram page, is the whole, as it sounds, Explanations from Exile. You'll find the link to the Eventbrite there. And yeah, we just look forward to seeing you there. It's going to be a powerful evening. This is the part 2 of the discussion, or powerful afternoon, I'm sorry. But yeah, looking forward to have you there.
Amazing, amazing. Again, we're going to pause for our station ID. You're tuned in to Healing Our Lands broadcasters. My special guest, Truth, who is the founder of Explanations
From
Exile.
Yes,
yeah, we're coming from exile. We just explaining. Now, just real quick, we're really 1 minute left. How that name, Explanations from Exile.
Yeah. Yeah, so individuals, incarcerated, individuals who have fallen victim to the 13th Amendment in our state constitution, which allows for slavery if you've been convicted of a crime, right? Individuals are exiles in their own land, right? So these are explanations from individuals, like I said, not excuses, but explanations of what was driving their decisions and what healing and accountability could look like. So that's the basis of Explanations from Exile.
I love it. We're going to get back on part 2. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Yes, He will make a way. You had pain, shame, suffering, no gain, had hurts, fears, heartache, and tears. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause God will make a way. Just hold, be still. He never gives you spirit of fear. Be patient and hear. Hold on, hope is here. You're the child of the King, and joy comes in the morning. Just praise your way. Just praise. Just praise. Just trust the King. Just praise. Let him just give God the praise. Come on, just pray. Just pray. Just pray. Alone, broken, torn. You're sad, afraid, and you made many mistakes. Can't go back and change. With God, that's okay. 'Cause you're more than a conqueror. Wonderfully made, and He saves and sets us free. He laid for you and me. He left His throne to show us some love. Just praise your way. Give God the praise. Just praise your way. Let Him have His way. Just give God the praise. Just praise the King. Just praise. Don't give up.
The voice of the church in New England. The views and opinions expressed by the following paid program are those of the program producers, and they do not reflect the views and opinion of Boston Praise Radio, its staff, or management.
Hi, this is Mike D of the UA7 Gospel Countdown, Urban America's 7 biggest current songs and more. Join us in fellowship with our broadcast on www.bostonpraiseradio.tv, Roku TV, and WBPG 102.9 FM radio. These TV and radio networks are all coming out of Boston. Radio and TV that cares about Boston and beyond. This is yours sincerely, Mike D of the UA7 Gospel Countdown. Tune in and be blessed.
This is Renee Wise, station manager for the Boston Praise Radio and TV network of 30 radio, TV, social media, and internet stations. You can broadcast on our network by just giving me a call, 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685.
You do. Yeah. Hey, we're back for part two. We're back for part two. Pastor Hobbs here in the studio with my guest, Truth. I almost wanted to say, I almost said Armand Coleman, who is with another brother, who has an incredible brother. Now, did you guys serve time together?
Dear brother of mine, for sure, yeah.
Really? Yeah, Armand Coleman. We interviewed him, Transformational Prison Project, and as well as the young brother who was with him, his community outreach person, whose name is escaping me right now. The last name is don't know the brother who is partner there.
Noble? Is it Noble?
Man.
Is it who else? Who else we got over there? Bobby.
That's him.
Okay, yeah,
that's
yeah.
him. Bobby. Yep, that's the one. Exactly, Bobby. To his last name starts with an I. I can't even try to pronounce it. It's a beautiful name, but they were both here. In fact, he was right here. And again, we're doing some work together, and we're going to talk a little bit about that work as it relates to. I love that you mentioned the 13th Amendment. Mm-hmm. Right? I was shocked to learn that. I learned that a few years ago. I'm part of something called Citizens United for the Rehabilitation of Errant to Cure, an international human rights and prison reform movement. And the founder, Charlie, was sat right here, and Louise Carcione, who actually introduced me. She was a president for the Massachusetts chapter for many years. She's now 91 years young, God bless her. And she's recently turned the helm over as the Massachusetts chapter to my brother Eric Kennedy, whom I met while he was incarcerated via this broadcast over. For 5 years, we followed him from Nashua County Jail, Suffolk County House Correction, to incarceration for 5 years. We had a relationship connected over the air. And not just we, but he had a voice and built really relationship with the whole community, interesting enough, and then came out and joined the church. He's now on our board of directors and guides a lot of the work that I do as it relates to those who are directly impacted. So that's why I learned that the 13th Amendment said that slavery was abolished with the exception of those who've been convicted of a crime. I mean, it's still inconceivable to me that exists today. Like, what do you mean with the exception? So that's why they can feel justified in being able to treat people inhumanely. I mean, it's interesting that the Second Amendment, not the Second Amendment. What is it? What amendment that said that we were 3/5 human? I don't know exactly what.
I don't remember which one that was either.
But we know that the Constitution initially said
Absolutely.
we as people of color weren't even fully human. It was all written by slave owners. So again, this whole notion of exiles, again, who built this country, is just inconceivable. And we're working on felony reenfranchisement, as that's something again that should be a right for all. And we're working together, and we'll get into a little bit of that before the broadcast is over. But again, you tuned into Healing Our Land's broadcast part 2. I just had a wonderful conversation to learn more of my brother Truth. And it's interesting because though we've been working together to do some stuff, this is my first time actually meeting him in person.
Yeah.
And actually hearing some more of your very specific journey to how you got to do the work that you're doing. So with that said, we talked offline a little bit, and he is, as he said, he's an artist, and that's some of the way that you facilitate some of the healing process.
Indeed.
So talk a little bit about that and share with us what's happening with your artistry, and share some of that with us live if you be so kind.
Yeah, for sure. So I discovered talent and passion for spoken word, like I said, while I was incarcerated. I discovered it while I was actually doing a stint in solitary confinement. So it's assisted me in the process of processing my experiences, right? Like I said, I'm in captivity when I discovered the thing, so there was a lot that I had to process that came before my incarceration and things that I had to process that were happening to me in real time, right? Like at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting because at the front door, right, at the moment of arrest,
Mm-hmm.
one is advised that anything you say, right, can and will be used against you,
Mm-hmm.
right? We will weaponize anything you say against you.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the lies, not just if I catch you in a lie. No, anything you say, we're going to use it against you. So, effectively, like, my voice was taken at the front door,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, this is a process of me kind of like reclaiming my voice, reclaiming my own narrative, taking control over my narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right? And accessing a sense of agency, like in my own healing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's what spoken word has been for me. In that space, where I would perform before 300 something prisoners, right? Like, individuals have told me, like, truth, like, the thing that you said, like, has changed my perspective on some things, right? Which for me has been like, I have to identify, like, there might be like even some like prophetic value here, right? Where you're like changing to some degree, you're altering the trajectory of individuals' lives, individuals who are hard to reach,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like I said, it's healing for me, and hopefully, you know, it can at least provide some perspective, at the very least, to individuals who are listening. So, yeah, I'd be happy to do a piece. It's actually a piece that I just released today.
Wow.
So if you want to hear it, you can hear it on Bandcamp, it's a pre-release. It'll be on platforms hopefully on Memorial Day, and we're releasing my debut spoken word mixtape in July.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So we'll have an event on July 6th at the JMAC Theater in Worcester for a listening and viewing party of, like I said, the mixtape and the visual album. So you could also find that link online as well, on my personal Facebook, Truth 7. So that's Truth, the number 2, RUTH 7. And you can find a link to tickets there. But this piece is called, the piece I'm going to give you is called The Schema. So, like I said, this piece like really speaks to, this is like me processing the things that happened to me and how I was impacted, and really what was driving me, and the things I hadn't processed yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how they were driving me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just go straight into the piece. Again, this is The Schema. Simply put, I've never been one who could be made to fit into ordinary schema. So, as the ages rolled out, in the same way they came, I remained diligent, deliberate to maintain my flame. I adhere to the primary theme at the bottom line of my conditioning. Bold as I was, I did as I was showed. The main tip I was told was to don't go missing, and to do my best not to get left spread thin, to lead with my limbs if it got tight. In any given incident, I could always leave it to my mother to grieve my innocence. So I took my time and dragged my feet. I made my debut in frayed jeans. They deemed me a stillborn spirit, a moral orphan. The focal point in an unframed portrait with no proportions by which to measure my conjectures for perfection or pain. A way to balance past losses with my false gains. My regrets might be all I have left to keep me sane. And I'm quite sure it might have seemed I was accident prone on the surface, but I had been hyper exposed to hollow souls, older men with no goals. When they found me, I practically lost all feeling, nearly swallowed whole by the role I was doled, almost sick beyond healing. At the time I was dolo, out of town, dressed down to avoid attempts at extortion, with a bag stashed for bail bonds and abortions. To me, they seemed to be appropriate measures in those moments. I had still yet to identify the B-side to my phobias. Overwhelmed with doubt and indecision, I bore witness to self-fulfilled premonitions. I seen myself in unzipped bag, cold slab, butt naked, toe tagged. I had to seek counsel from my intuition. And it was thereby that I was advised to bury my skeletons alive and to take time to traverse the distance, to go where the goings lead, to bleed what I've been meant to bleed. And when I return, hopefully I might see that my needs will be different. Along the way, I penetrated the most vaguest of spaces. Experience demonstrated just how quickly names get changed and replaced. In turn, my paranoid eye trained to retain the face. I opted for the case over the casket and chose time over the tomb. Bunched in with youth who've been brainwashed to be more interested in loyalty than truth. And my group was the wide-eyed, inspired, the not so easily deterred, advised in advance of the forfeitures we would incur. So at the perennial powwows, I would just linger on the outskirts. In time, they came to label me the energetic introvert. But I could see that the wisest among us only seemed to learn in subtle integers, and the tale only ever proved as good as the listener. The listener. So that's the schema.
Wow.
Again, that's out. That's available right now. This was a cappella. I work with a very strong production team. There's a very rich production on this in this project. But yeah, if you'd like to stream or download the piece, again, it's on Bandcamp. So that's, again, Truth, the number 2 RUTH, and then the number 7 2RUTH7.bandcamp.com.
Powerful, powerful. So this is your debut.
Yes, sir.
Single, but you said there's a whole full project that's coming out.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, if folks are interested in being able to connect with you and the work that you do, talk a little bit about this is an LLC, the Explanations Beyond from Exile.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so those who are just tuning in, this is part 2. Our brother, we shared a little bit before, but for those who may be joining for the first time, and even those who maybe were before, how can they a little bit about the LLC and how folks can support the work that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So Explanations from Exile is a multimedia, multidimensional organization where we highlight the interconnection between urban trauma, urban violence, and mass incarceration. So like I said, we take a multimedia approach to that, whether it's with the arts, whether it's with visuals, whether it's with poetry, music, data, storytelling. Like I said, just a very multi-dimensional approach to elevating this conversation that society has been given license to negate. Right? Yeah.
So with that said, so that's the LLC that was now it was something. It was started while you were incarcerated. Now, did it become an LLC? Did you formalize it post coming out of incarceration, or were you able to actually establish an LLC while incarcerated?
So it just started as like I said, out of like kind of desperation to like I said, reclaim the stories and take ownership over the healing process that individuals are facilitating in there. And when I say facilitating, like these processes were facilitated by incarcerated individuals, right? So yeah, so it started that way, and then like I said, we moved into the realm of data, right? Because I know when you want to have these conversations, everybody isn't necessarily moved by the stories that they can't necessarily relate to, right? So data tells a story of itself, tells a story in and of itself, but tells a much broader story that's just a little bit more, for some, just easier to access and a little bit more tangible, right? So and then when I got home, obviously I have more access, right? To different outlets, and I can put my my art and my voice into the universe. So yeah, that's when it kind of morphed into like a multimedia situation. But yeah, it started as a writing project while I was inside, and it's been we officiated it and made it official LLC since I've been home.
So talk about a little bit about the journey post being home.
Yeah, so that's, still on that journey.
How long have you been home?
I've been home about 20 months now. As I said earlier, I was gone for 16 years. Out on parole now.
You're on parole?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's been a journey, right? Like I've had a lot of support, right? A lot of community support, even prior to me coming home. But it is a journey, right? Like when you're in, as I stated, like when you're in exile for that long, for any period of time, like I've seen individuals' lives ruined in the first 90 days of their incarceration, right? You lose your job, you lose your home, you lose your car, you lose it. Life is ruined. So, yeah, you're gone for 16 years. I know brothers that have been incarcerated for much longer than that, but it's a journey just to I don't even want to say reacclimate, right? Like because like I said, I didn't feel like I was a part of society. I was on the fringes of society even when I was home, right? So in many ways, this is my first introduction to like any sense of like community, right? And a lot of that community was developed while I was gone, right? So it's a lot to recover from. Like I said, I'm still recovering from things that happened before my incarceration.
Sure.
Right? Much less the things like that I incurred, the compound trauma that I incurred while I was there. But I think with all the support that I've had, there's still, days and moments where I feel very alienated, right? Because it's like even the people closest to me, they can't relate to anything that I went through, right? While I was gone. As supportive as they want to be, they can't relate. So in many ways, that can be a lonely place.
Sure.
Like I said, there were certain family bonds that were strained before I went in. Now imagine, throwing 16 years of separation in that mix and what comes out of that, right? Like I'm still making sense of that, right? There's still bonds that we haven't recovered. Like we haven't recovered from the racial trauma, much less the incarceration and the separation, right? So it's like there's a lot to navigate. And then taking into account, like there's a lot, literally I'm starting my life over from scratch, right? So there's a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of obligations that I feel. There's all this survivor's guilt, right? There's a lot of brothers that I left behind that may not be coming home, right? So there's that. It's just there's a lot. So I'm still processing. I'm still figuring out what it means to like not be in a cage.
Yeah, man.
Right? So I'm happy. I mean, I'm happy to be home. Like I'm very grateful. and I'm very honest with myself that this is a lot.
Sure.
Right? It's
Sure.
a lot, and I got to give myself some grace.
Yeah, man.
And take care of myself.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Like I'm still figuring out like what does it mean
Yeah.
to be as outspoken and as much of an advocate as you are around these topics and discussions of trauma. What does it mean to re-traumatize yourself just to make the to make the conversation relevant, right? To get people who don't look like me but have louder voices than me, who haven't experienced what I've experienced but have louder voices than me on the topic. What does it mean to re-traumatize myself just to get them to see and feel and hear and to acknowledge me in my experience? What does that mean? And how do I take care of myself in that process? And do I even want to do this?
Facts.
Right? Because I had to do it. There's a lot of things that I had to do to get my life back. I had to teach myself law, right? I had no aspirations to be a lawyer or a paralegal ever. But if I wanted my life back, that's something I had to do,
Sure.
right? I had to learn how to do things like this. I have no interest in really being a public speaker, but I have to do it in order to facilitate the discussion.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of things that I don't want to do,
Yeah.
but I feel obligated to do it. And what does that mean to wake up every day and do something I don't want to do?
Wow. Do you feel when you say you don't, and that's an interesting point that you don't want to do? Do you feel an obligation? Do you feel called, a responsibility?
I do feel a calling. I do feel a responsibility. And I'm frustrated that I have to do it, right? Or that I feel like I have to do it. I don't have to do it, right? But I wouldn't be okay with myself not doing it. And like I said, it feels that's something that I have to process, because I'm also not, my circumstances have changed, right? I'm not in the cage anymore, right? So it's like my circumstances have changed somewhat. I'm free-ish. I'm on life parole, right? So it's like I'm not actually free.
Sure.
Right? I still have an owner. The state still owns me. Right? If I want to go out of the state, guess what? I got to get a travel pass. Right? Like I'm on the plantation. I got to get an officer. I got to find the first officer I can identify wherever I go and get him to sign my travel pass so I can bring it back to my owner so I don't get in trouble. Right? So I can't say I'm free. Right? But that's why I do what I do with the art, right? Because before I came home, I said there's two things I will not be. I will not be a starving artist, and I will not be a starving protester. But I have to marry my passion for justice and my passion for the arts, right? And I only developed my passion for justice because I've been fighting for my life for the past decade and some change, right? So I think there will be a time where I'm less front line than I am right now. And I think that time is approaching, because the first year I was out was like very, I abused myself the first year I was out, right? Because I'm trying to be in every room and engage in every conversation around this topic and amplify this discussion, and it wasn't healthy at all, right? I compromised a lot. Right? So it wasn't healthy. I'm still finding balance.
Yep.
Right? And what it means to like be an advocate and be a minister of justice and a creative and a reentry coach, and I'm still part of a family, right? So it's like
right.
there's all that.
Yeah.
So
No, I appreciate that transparency. You know, for the person that's tuned in to this broadcast, who is the impacted one, whose child,
yes,
loved one, will never come back,
yeah,
right? And with a life sentence that one gets, and for people, with a life sentence that some folks, don't make parole.
right,
They still there, as you said, the survivor's guilt, right? They're there, you're here, but acknowledging that in fact someone's life has been taken,
yes,
and their family is sentenced to suffer the loss of their loved one.
that's a fact.
So reconciling, the fact that you do have a life parole, and I understand the challenges of going and feeling property, and I can empathize with
Of
that,
course.
particularly given the context you've shared.
Yes,
With that said, you're alive,
absolutely.
and you have a semblance of freedom. With that said, is that something that makes you feel some level of responsibility with that balance of self-care?
Yes, and I think, thank you for that question. It's a great question, right? And I think a big part of that is where the obligation comes in, right? Because like you said, someone's life was taken, and I cannot measure the impact that that's had, right? Beyond the life that was taken, right?
Yeah.
That's the central piece that is like, that's for the rest of my life, that's going to be at the center
Yeah.
of who I am and how I maneuver through this world, right? So I have an obligation to honor that, right? Now, a big part of that is, like I said, acknowledging this is heavy, man. Like, when I think about the life that was taken, the life that, listen, we using like restorative and accountable language, the life that I took,
Okay.
right? I don't get to just drop the pebble in the pond, watch all those ripples, and just move about my life and act like that didn't just happen,
Talk.
right? I don't get to do that. I think about the first time I ever heard a gunshot, right, in a space that I was occupying, right? And the way that confirmed that, yo, this space that you're in right now is not safe.
First time you ever heard a gun shot? You talking about pre everything?
Pre-carceral.
Okay.
I'm like, yo, this is not. It was confirmed for me,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
not a safe space.
Yeah.
Prior to that, and during that time, society had confirmed to me, you don't matter. Right? So if I don't matter,
Right.
then I guess the things that I'm doing out here must not matter. Right? If I can anticipate that I won't be alive in the next 24 months, then I guess I'm not going to be living with the consequences of what I'm doing. I'm not going to be living with the consequences of the survival that I'm striving to acquire. Right?
Yep.
And that doesn't, my detachment, right, from my own emotions, from the consequences, that doesn't erase the consequences, right? So I have to, in the process of healing, I have to acknowledge, it's a very heavy realization when you realize, almost everybody in my life has been negatively impacted by virtue of me being in their life.
Whoa.
And that's just people I know. The first responder, the person up the street who heard that gunshot, the coroner,
Yeah.
these just people I know. Like I said, I can't measure. I can't do it. Right? So what I can offer and at this point, forgive me too, right? Because like I've been doing this work for so long and I've been having these conversations on such a consistent basis. At times I have to be mindful, like there's nothing that goes without saying. Right? I can assume that I've been doing this, so some things go without saying. No, there's nothing that goes without saying.
Nothing.
Right? So what I can offer is like the most sincere apology, not just apology, but like I said, actual acknowledgement of what I actually did. Right? What I actually took. I took a life, but I didn't just take a life. I took people's like sense of safety. I took people's sense of community. I took people's sense of self, right? Who are you? Like when you survive something, like your sense of self is like, it's not going to be the same. The way you see yourself in this world is not going to be the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So I have to acknowledge that. And along with that, I have to tell the whole truth.
Yes.
Right? I have to say to the mother who wants to know why, I got to tell you why. I got to tell you why this made sense to me at the time. Every decision I've ever made in my life has made sense to me at the time. Right? And if you understand, if you can understand, like the impact of surviving and witnessing the same thing that I did, the impact that I can tell you the impact that had on me without excusing what I did. I can tell you that. And maybe, hopefully, if I can give you, like I said, some access to that, hopefully we can facilitate, because you'll have answers at that point. They may not be satisfactory. I'm going to do my best to be able to give you like a thorough answer, right? And a heartfelt answer, and be able to attach real emotions, right? Which for me, what I found in the storytelling, that's the connecting thread, right? If you can't identify with my circumstances, you can identify with what it is to feel afraid. You can identify with what it feels to be confused. You can identify, especially if you're from these communities that I'm talking about, right? This is not a scenario where this doesn't happen. This is a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Right? So if you can connect with that, then hopefully, like I said, at the very least, there can be an understanding. And my commitment is to, like I said, honoring that, even when I don't want to.
Okay. Really?
Right?
Yeah.
So, and it's not that I don't want to honor the thing.
Sure.
Right? It's that it's everything that comes it's everything that comes along with it.
Being.
This is a hot topic, right?
Hot topic.
Justice reform.
Yeah.
And decarceration and all that. So I'll say this, right? Like, we know everybody doesn't come, everybody doesn't come to this thing with the same motivations.
Real talk.
right?
Yep.
So that's something that I have to navigate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Taking care of myself,
Yes.
ensuring that I'm sane enough
Yeah.
and balanced enough to do the work,
Sure.
right? And understanding that a lot of the pushback and resistance that I'm going to get. Who is this individual that has he's taken a life and now he has a nerve to come and talk about his pain,
There's folks who would say that for sure.
right?
Yeah.
So the thing at the moment that I committed
Mm-hmm.
the act,
Mm-hmm.
society's been given license to invalidate anything that I experienced prior to that. I'm challenging that because
Mm-hmm.
you cannot fully understand.
Yep.
You can't get to healing without accountability, right? And I can't take accountability if I'm not telling my whole truth,
Yes, sir.
right? So these are hard
Mm-hmm.
conversations to have, and everybody's not at the point where they're ready to have them. And we did restorative justice. We talk about meeting people where they're at,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You're upset and you're in pain, and of course you should be,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there's a process of, hopefully, like I said, community building and restoration.
Mm-hmm.
That there's an opportunity for that as well.
You know, and I appreciate you in them. I'm on this restorative justice, right? You said, I get it. There's this thing I call the color of money, right? Everybody's all of a sudden, you know, and again, a lot of times it becomes a money grab. Let's just, they pimp an issue, is what I call it, right? And but this is really, when you talk about violence, right, which quite candidly has happened since the beginning of humanity.
Sure.
Right, the first family, the Garden of Eden, Cain killed his brother Abel, right? So even the notion I'm black, you know, vice, white, you know, violence,
Mm-hmm.
it's a human kind of a thing, unfortunately, that has been since the very first family. With that said, fast forward, I had the opportunity to go to Rwanda in the context of a CURE conference. So CURE conference, every 2 years they go to a different country. And we meet people from all across the world and talk about restorative justice, talk about human rights and prison reform. And we visit an incarceral setting in every country we go to, and we learn best practices, things that are innovative, but things that are, you know, that we're advocating for that are just horrible. But here in the being, first of all, in the motherland, which was surreal as an African American. Second of all, going to the prison there and seeing the conditions of those settings, as bad as they are here, it was way worse there. I mean, it just broke your heart to see all these black men in these places and to see the desperation in their eyes, even when you come like save us, you know, because they put on a dog and pony show. We know this, right? But aside of that, the story of going to, or hearing the whole story of the genocide in Rwanda and the restorative justice practices, we talk about, it's hard. I can't even comprehend taking a loved one's life, but your whole family, right? I mean, and then tribe against tribe, and you literally genocide to a whole country, and the people who were in cahoots, the government, the religious institutions, and but to see how they have these restorative justice communities, right? Like when you live with the people in community whom you took. I have 5 spiritual sons now who are orphans who never knew their mother or father because of the genocide, right? So, but to see people, and one of the gentlemen I met who was in a reconciliation village, that you live with the people whom were actually the perpetrators. But I love what you said earlier about the systems that we had that are designed to really perpetuate the problem, right? Everybody's making money, but when you can't even speak to the person who you caused the harm to, or their family, and you don't get an opportunity to say to them, they don't get an opportunity, and the community everything in context, right? When the community comes and says, this is what you do, this is how you fix this. And from my perspective, I mete out your sentence for taking my loved one. And you yield to that to be out of this setting that's just, not really facilitating any healing. So you take my loved one's life and I want you in jail for the rest of your life. Or worst, I want to take your life by capital punishment. Where's the reconciliation? Where's the restoration? Where's the healing?
Exactly.
So restorative justice practices are definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
But full circle. So how do we get these kinds of things? And when I think about this happening there and what they're doing, and the benefit of that, and you were introduced to restorative justice practices while you were incarcerated, facilitated by people who facilitated these restorative justice practices, who introduced it to you? It were the other people whom were how were you introduced to the restorative justice practices in the incarceral setting?
So there was a riot that took place in the prison. A lot of people got seriously hurt.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a prison resident who was studying restorative justice practices, who serving a life sentence and wanted to take responsibility for safety which was in his community. This was now his community.
Yes.
Right. So he approached him and a brother named Supreme, they were very instrumental in facilitating and putting together restorative justice practices in the facility. But that was initiated by residents who were incarcerated for violence, right? And wanted to facilitate a process that could ensure that their community, the community that they lived in now, was safe, right? In that space and beyond. Right? So when we send people to prison and expect, now there's more data, and for our listeners, I would recommend this book. It's by Danielle Sarit. It's called Until We Reckon, right? And she provides a lot of data and insight to what it looks like, what it could look like, what it should look like when it comes to dealing with violence and healing in our communities, right? They took some statistics, and individuals that I don't remember the exact numbers, but the vast majority of survivors who were surveyed communicated that they didn't receive the healing and satisfaction that they anticipated they would after the responsible party was sentenced. Right? Restorative, like I said, it was super transformative for me while I was inside. But guess what? We dealt with surrogates. We didn't even get to deal with the direct parties that were harmed. So I had to use my imagination as to how the family of the life that I took, I had to use my imagination as to how they were impacted.
Sure.
Right? So they were excluded from the process.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why I used it's a very strong term, like I said, the exploitation of their healing, right? And well, not even of their healing, of their pain. Right? Yeah, they were excluded from that process. So like I said, that's again where the obligation comes in, because it's like, man, I got to get all this healing and all this community, and they didn't get none of that. Wasn't even an option. So yeah, there's definitely, to your question, like there's definitely a sense of obligation and responsibility to them that's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, yeah, I'm not complaining like, oh man, I got to do all this work, but it's just, I have to acknowledge
The truth.
how heavy it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the last thing we need is for individuals to come out of this setting, come out of incarceration, if they come out,
Yeah.
unhealed.
Yeah.
Because what we're seeing, like I said, prior to these are actions of unhealed people.
No doubt. Yes, sir.
Right? There was a process of becoming that these individuals went through, and individuals didn't get to choose how they were impacted by the trauma they was exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The fact that individuals had little to no assistance, right, in navigating these communities and this trauma,
Sure,
right,
sure.
wasn't a choice.
Sure.
So, like I said, it's not an excuse, but these are things. If we want to understand,
Right. Right.
these are factors that I think we have to consider.
No, I totally appreciate that. You know, I live in the city, right? And I talk to folks, you know, as a person who goes behind the wall, as a volunteer chaplain, as a person who is a person who serves in ministry, right? And talk with people and hear the stories. And when people are traumatized and they don't feel safe, and you wonder why so many people are carrying weapons. They don't feel safe.
Right.
They don't feel protected. And trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, and everything you're saying in terms of kind of a desensitization of feeling,
Sure.
really, and it's, you know, you're in the Boston Praise Radio and TV Network is in the lower level of a church, right? And as a church, right, and as a faith community, right, which is that really I think has an ultimate responsibility to facilitate healing and restorative justice and prevention, right, and breaking down these systems of places of truth and healing and structures and spaces of pathways to reentry that people have. Community. I mean, you were paroled to a program or to a family, or I'm just curious in your particular situation.
Yeah, I was paroled to a program. Yeah. So I spent 6 months there. And while I was there, I was able to work with an organization called Thrive Communities, which helped me facilitate all my like essential needs, right? Like IDs. I didn't have an ID for the first 4 months I was out. So I couldn't get a job. I couldn't open a bank account. So like those things, they assisted me with. And I think when we talk about like violence prevention,
Yeah.
right? A lot of time we look at prison as though prison is violence prevention, right? And it's like, who better equipped to prevent the violence than individuals who have enacted it and survived it, right? Who's better equipped? Because it's like, I know what my needs are.
Yes.
I know how my needs maybe weren't met. And when we talk about community is supposed to provide the essential needs.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So when I don't have those essential needs, now we get subcultures.
Yes.
Right? Which are finding strange and counterproductive ways of securing those needs. But those are their needs nonetheless.
Yes.
Right? So, like I said, I cannot have reverence for a community that has demonstrated, not only suggested, but had been convinced that I didn't matter.
Sure.
So how can I have reverence? When and how am I going to develop a sense of reverence for that community while I'm there? While I'm surviving it? Now, I understand that I was a hazard to myself and everyone around me at that time. I will not say prison saved my life, because prison tried to kill me, right? But I will say that I was able to take advantage of that period in solitude, despite everything that was taking place, everything that was happening to me in that time, right? And things that just weren't necessary, right? I'm an advocate. This is a quick sidebar, but like, just as an example, when we talk about like what's necessary in these spaces of accountability and how it undermines healing, right? I talk a lot about like state-sanctioned sexual assault, right? That's imposed on individuals in the form of a strip search, right? When the state has been given license to sexually assault me under the guise of security.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes.
When if I were to go outside and threaten somebody with force, if they don't take all their clothes off in front of me and do all manner of movements and poses, and I will have to register.
Correct.
As a sex offender.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
I've been on a couple planes since I've been home, and I didn't have to strip at that airport.
Yeah.
Right? We battling international terrorism. I walked through an X-ray machine.
Yeah.
And I went about my way.
Yes, sir.
Right? So these compound traumas with no accountability.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't facilitate healing.
Not at all.
That doesn't facilitate accountability. So, but like I said, in spite of all that.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not the rule. This is we're not just like, I'm not for exceptionalism. I am not the rule. I am the exception to the rule, and I can't even take credit for that.
No. Yeah.
I'm fortunate.
Yes, sir.
But I was able to access some measure of healing, and I was able to help in my small way to contribute to a similar process, right? And there's as little ego as can be in this statement, but that's what I'm talking about when I say who's best equipped, right, to facilitate these conversations and policies and enactment. Like, who is best equipped to facilitate violence prevention, right? Because that's, like I said, in these inner city spaces that overlap, I'll use the system language, the surviving offender. It's not a binary conversation when we talk in inner city spaces. It's not survivor over here, offender over here. Nah, but this is a hybrid situation.
Yes, sir.
I was a survivor first. So, with that, I can empathize. It's not like I don't know what's going on. It's not like I can't feel. At that time, I probably wasn't feeling because I was so numb because I had experienced so much pain.
Yes, sir.
But yes, when I see the mother now, it's like, oh man, I see my mother. And when she tells me her story, I didn't get to ask the survivors in my situation, how would this impacted you? I don't know. But when you lay that out to me, and I have the opportunity to face what I actually did, that's an opportunity for like to access my own humanity, because I've been detached from it for so long. Not by choice. Right? So it's like, you gave me a gift, you gave me my own, and you gave me a sense of responsibility too. Right? However freeing or however healing that is for you, I can imagine, because I've been through similar I've shared the space with you. Mothers have come. They say, yo, when I see you, I see my son. My son who's no longer with us. I see you. I see him when I look at you. That's significant.
Sure. Yes.
And they come back. Because these are healing spaces. You cannot heal. It's very difficult to heal when all you have is your imagination, man.
Good.
I can only imagine. And then we start to draw our own conclusions based off things we don't know. Who wants that? Right? So, these, like I said, these are very tough conversations to have. And I completely understand anyone who would not want to have the thing. I get it. Right? I had a conversation with somebody. This is how I learned a little bit about, and I was so grateful when I was able to have a conversation with this brother. It's a brother that grew up with the young man whose life I took.